You need to be firmer. I need someone who knows how to do it, not just touch it lightly." He gave a strained smile, his hands beginning to massage more firmly. The initial movements were clumsy, but gradually I could feel his focus and skill improving. "You're doing better than I expected," I said, my tone softening. "Your dad used to do this for me every night, but you're not a bad substitute today." Ethan smiled, his eyes lighting up at the compliment. "Mom, you look so youthful. That dress suits you perfectly." I turned to look at him, a faint smile playing on my lips. "You know how to flatter, Ethan." As Ethan continued massaging, an unexpected incident occurred. While moving his hands down my back, he accidentally touched a sensitive area of my body. I jolted and turned sharply to look at him. Ethan's face flushed red, and he quickly pulled his hands back. I'm sorry, Mom," he stammered, avoiding eye contact. I looked at him, noticing the panic on his youthful face. "You've never seen it before, have you?" I asked, trying to maintain a calm demeanor, even though I felt a tinge of embarrassment inside. Ethan didn't respond, keeping his head bowed. I chuckled softly, a laugh that was half teasing, half an attempt to hide my own discomfort. "All right, keep going. I need to sleep early. I am Victoria. Nearly 50 years old, I am the kind of woman society calls successful. A powerful CEO in the real estate industry. I not only own luxurious villas, but am also a symbol of confidence and independence. My life used to revolve around work, leaving no time for romantic relationships or family. Yet, no matter how successful I am, I cannot deny the emptiness in my heart. When I met Richard, a kind and simple man, I thought I could find peace with him, not because of a passionate love, but out of gratitude and affection. Richard had once saved me from a severe car accident, and as a result, he suffered a leg injury that left him with permanent difficulty balancing. After his recovery, I decided to marry him, as a way of repaying him, and also to seek a missing piece in my life. But I also understood that Richard was not the kind of man who could make my heart beat faster. Ethan, Richard's 22-year-old son, is tall, handsome, and quick-witted. He had just graduated from college, but hadn't yet found a job. I brought both father and son to live in my villa in the suburbs, hoping to build a warm family. However, the relationship between Ethan and me was not particularly deep. Ethan understood his position in the household. He knew that I was the decision-maker, and that both he and his father needed to make an effort to please me. But Ethan never seemed servile or distant. He had a quiet confidence, occasionally paired with clever jokes, which caught my attention. Richard was a good husband, but I sometimes couldn't hide my disappointment with him. He was too simple, too submissive, and seemed incapable of grasping the complexities of my soul. I didn't hate him, but his meekness made me feel as though I carried the weight of the entire family. Every evening, after a long day at work, Richard would massage my shoulders and back. It was a small ritual that brought me comfort. Still, his presence could not fill the emptiness in my heart. That day was particularly exhausting. There were numerous issues at the company that needed resolving, and I had to make a series of critical decisions. As I drove home, my whole body felt drained, and my shoulders ached unbearably. Usually, Richard would help me relax, but today he had stayed late at the office to handle a project I had assigned him. When I entered the house, I saw only Ethan sitting in the living room, his long legs sprawled across the chair, a TV remote in his hand. He glanced up at me and offered a polite smile. "Is your father coming home late?" I asked, my voice tinged with fatigue. "Yes, he said there's urgent work today," Ethan replied, his eyes showing a hint of concern as he noticed my furrowed brow. I didn't say anything more, heading upstairs to my bedroom to change. The cool water from the shower soothed some of my soreness, but I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep well without someone massaging me. Thinking of Richard, I felt a twinge of irritation that he wasn't here. Slipping into my soft black nightgown, the one I usually wore at home, I decided to call Ethan in. After all, he was the only one in the house at the moment. I opened the bedroom door and walked downstairs. Ethan was still sitting in the living room, his eyes glued to the TV screen, but my presence made him immediately look up. "Ethan, I need your help with something," I said calmly, not leaving him room to refuse. "Yes?" Ethan stood up, his expression slightly surprised, but quick to respond. "My shoulders hurt, and your father isn't home. Come up to my room and help me with a massage." Ethan hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. "Sure, I'll help you." He followed me upstairs. I could sense his awkwardness in every step he took, and it made me smile. The spacious bedroom, softly lit by the bedside lamp, created a warm and cozy atmosphere. I sat on the bed, brushed my hair to one side, and gestured toward my shoulders. Ethan hesitantly stepped closer, his eyes filled with unease and shyness. After all, this was my bedroom, where Richard, his father, and I shared our private space. But my gaze gave him no chance to back out. "Sit in that chair over there first." I pointed to a small chair by the bed. He complied, his clumsy hands resting on my shoulders as if searching for a way to start. "Come on, get started. My shoulders hurt a lot," I said, my tone a bit commanding. Ethan moved closer, his awkward hands settling on my shoulders. "Does it hurt a lot, Mom?" I sighed, frowning slightly. "You need to be firmer. I need someone who knows what they're doing, not just touching for the sake of it." Ethan tried harder, his hands pressing more firmly, moving slowly along my shoulders. Though still clumsy, he was genuinely trying. I could feel it. A slight pain ran down my back, but with it came a sense of relaxation. I let my body loosen up, my eyes closing slightly. Ethan paused momentarily but continued. As his hands moved lower down my back, I sensed his hesitation, as if he was wrestling with himself. "You're too tense," I remarked. "Relax. I don't bite." I'm just afraid of hurting you," he mumbled softly. I chuckled lightly. "Just go ahead. If it hurts, I'll tell you." "That's better." I exhaled, my voice softening. "Keep going on my back, top to bottom." "You're better than I expected," I said, my tone gentler. "Your dad usually does this for me every night, but you're not a bad stand-in today." Ethan smiled, his eyes lighting up at the compliment. "You look so youthful, Mom. That dress suits you perfectly." I turned to look at him, a faint smile on my lips. "You know how to flatter, Ethan." As Ethan continued massaging, an unexpected incident occurred. While moving his hands further down my back, he accidentally touched a sensitive part of my body. I jolted, turning sharply to look at him. Ethan's face turned bright red, and he immediately pulled his hands back. I'm sorry, Mom," he stammered, avoiding my gaze. I looked at him, noticing the panic on his youthful face. "You've never seen it before, have you?" I asked, trying to maintain a calm demeanor, though a flicker of embarrassment crossed my mind. Ethan didn't answer, keeping his head down. I chuckled softly, a laugh that was half teasing, half an attempt to mask my own discomfort. "All right, keep going. I need to sleep early." The remaining moments passed in silence. When Ethan left the room, I lay down on the bed, staring into the void. Something had shifted. I wasn't sure what, but I knew that from that moment, a new door had opened in the relationship between Ethan and me. Unconsciously, yet inevitably. As he walked away, I stayed still, my eyes following his retreating figure. A faint smile crossed my lips, its meaning unclear, whether joy or sorrow I couldn't tell. I thought to myself, Richard might never understand that sometimes I need more than just simple care. That night, I had a strange dream. In it, I was young again, revisiting the days of my youth when my heart was open to intense emotions and hidden desires. But when I woke up, reality was still reality, and I had to face myself once more. The morning sunlight streamed through the curtains, illuminating the spacious bedroom. I woke up with a peculiar feeling lingering in my heart. Last night, after the minor incident with Ethan, my mind had been restless. The images, the moments, kept replaying in my head, leaving me sleepless through the night. Richard had left early for work, leaving the villa quiet, with just Ethan and me. I walked downstairs, trying to fill the silence with the clinking of knives and plates at breakfast. When Ethan appeared, he maintained his usual calm demeanor, but I could sense a trace of awkwardness in his eyes. "Mom, can I help you with anything?" Ethan asked, breaking the silence in the kitchen. I glanced at him. "No need. Just prepare something for yourself." Ethan nodded, but he didn't leave. Instead, he pulled out a chair and sat across from me. "Mom, did you sleep well last night?" The question was like a small spark igniting a fuse. I set my coffee cup down, my gaze fixed on him. "Not really, but that doesn't matter." Ethan remained silent, but I could tell he was deep in thought. The shift in the atmosphere left me feeling unsettled. I decided to leave the table, leaving him alone with his thoughts. I threw myself into work all day to keep my mind busy, but images of Ethan occasionally flashed through my thoughts. I didn't want to admit that this young, handsome stepson was exerting a kind of pull on me that I couldn't control. "This is madness, Victoria," I told myself while sitting in my office. "He's just Richard's son. It's all because I'm tired, under too much work pressure." But deep down, I knew those justifications couldn't extinguish the growing curiosity and emotions stirring within me. That evening, when I returned home, Ethan was waiting at the door. He took my handbag, something he had never done before. "You seem tired today. I made some dinner for you," Ethan said softly. I was momentarily surprised. Ethan wasn't usually this proactive. "You cooked?" I raised an eyebrow, unable to hide my curiosity. Ethan smiled, his eyes lighting up. "I wanted to help you. You've been working hard all day." I couldn't deny that his gesture warmed my heart. The dinner was simple but delicious, and for the first time, I felt a peculiar connection with Ethan, no longer as distant as before. After dinner, I intended to go upstairs and rest when I heard Ethan's footsteps following behind me. "Mom, if you need me to massage you, I'm still willing to help," Ethan said cautiously but with genuine sincerity. I paused, turning to look at him. "Do you think I'll ask you to do that again?" Ethan hesitated. "Not exactly. I just want to help if you need me." I could sense the awkwardness in his words, but at the same time, I couldn't deny that his concern softened my heart. "Fine, if you insist. But remember, just massage my shoulders. Don't repeat last night's mistake." He smiled, his cheeks slightly flushed. "Yes, I understand." I sat on the bed, still in the same elegant black nightgown as the night before. Ethan stood beside me, his gaze briefly flickering when he looked at me. "What are you waiting for?" I urged, trying to sound casual. Ethan placed his hands on my shoulders and began massaging. His initial movements were still a bit clumsy, but gradually, he grew more skilled. I closed my eyes, feeling the pain slowly melt away. But then, in a fleeting moment, his hand brushed lightly against the skin near the neckline of my gown. I opened my eyes, turning to look at him. "What are you doing again, Ethan?" Ethan immediately stepped back, his face flushing bright red. "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't mean to." I sighed, but this time, instead of scolding him, I let out a soft laugh. "It's all right. It was just an accident." "Keep going." Ethan nodded, though he avoided meeting my eyes. The atmosphere in the room suddenly grew heavier. I couldn't tell if it was due to exhaustion or the vague feelings that were beginning to grow within me. When Ethan left the room, I lay down on the bed, feeling my heart beating faster than usual. I didn't want to admit that I was paying too much attention to my stepson. But at the same time, I couldn't deny that Ethan was bringing back a feeling I hadn't experienced in a long time, a sense of attention and care that Richard had never given me. I sighed, staring at the ceiling. It's all just a misunderstanding. I'm overthinking it, I told myself, but my mind continued to wrestle with the thought. Would this relationship end here? Or was it opening a door I didn't want to step through? The answer remained unclear, lying somewhere in the future. That night, I lay on the bed, my eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. The soft yellow light of the bedside lamp couldn't calm my restless mind. The image of Ethan's hand accidentally brushing against a sensitive part of my back replayed in my head, like a slow-motion film. It was a strange feeling, not entirely pleasant, but not completely unpleasant either. It was just an accident. Stop overthinking, I whispered to myself. But reason couldn't dispel the chaotic emotions creeping into my heart. I wasn't the kind of person easily swayed by things beyond my control. Yet in that moment, I felt uncharacteristically vulnerable and uncertain. The next morning, I woke up feeling more exhausted than usual. Richard still hadn't returned, and Ethan had left the house early. I sank into the sofa in the living room, brewed a cup of coffee, but didn't drink it. My thoughts swirled incessantly, posing endless questions. Why let things get this far? I silently chastised myself. But when I thought of Ethan's awkward gaze, his flustered yet respectful gestures, I couldn't bring myself to be angry at him. That evening, Ethan came home late. I was sitting in the living room, flipping through a book, though my eyes weren't registering the words on the pages. When he walked in, I looked up. "Ethan, why are you back so late?" I asked, trying to keep my voice as natural as possible. I had some errands to run in town," he replied, his eyes briefly avoiding mine. Clearly he wasn't comfortable after what happened the night before. "Come here," I called, my voice lower than usual. "I want to talk." Ethan approached hesitantly, sitting down in the chair across from me. His hands rested on his knees, like a child waiting to be scolded. "Last night, do you have anything you want to say?" I asked, looking straight at him, my gaze unyielding. Ethan lowered his head, stammering. I just want to apologize, Mom. I didn't mean to." "Do you think I'm upset with you because of that?" I chuckled lightly, shaking my head. "There's no need to apologize. But I want to know, how do you feel about it?" My question left Ethan stunned. He looked up, his eyes wide with confusion. I don't know how to put it. It's just, I feel very strange." I raised an eyebrow slightly. "Strange in what way?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. He paused for a moment before speaking softly. "You're a very, very special woman, Mom. I feel like I don't know how to behave around you." His confession left me speechless. Ethan's words weren't overly explicit, but I could sense the sincerity in every word. He wasn't trying to please me. He was genuinely expressing his feelings. I stared at him for a long moment before sighing. "Ethan, you're a smart young man who cares about people. But you have to understand that in this family, everything must have boundaries." "I understand," Ethan quickly replied. "I won't let last night happen again." I nodded, feeling a sense of relief. But at the same time, an indescribable sadness lingered. Ethan was a young man, full of life, while I had lived more than half my life, and those fleeting emotions, no matter how brief, left me feeling weak and vulnerable. That entire evening, Ethan and I avoided each other. I stayed in my study trying to focus on work, but my mind kept spinning with thoughts of him. I told myself this would pass, that it was just a minor incident in family life. Yet deep down, I knew things were no longer the same. Would I be strong enough to confront my feelings? Or would things become even more complicated? My mind was full of questions, yet no answers seemed clear. All I knew was that from now on, every decision I made would affect this family, and I couldn't afford to make a mistake. The next morning, the house was unusually quiet. I woke earlier than usual, preparing breakfast as I always did, but my mood was far from light. The large dining table seated only two, Ethan and me. He sat at the head of the table, holding a glass of orange juice, his eyes avoiding direct contact with mine. The silence between us only heightened the tension I felt. The events of the previous night remained vivid in my mind, like a stain spreading across a white cloth. I tried to keep my tone casual. "Ethan, do you have any plans for today?" Ethan looked up, a hint of surprise flickering in his eyes at the unexpected question. I was planning to stay home. Do you need me to do anything?" I shook my head, offering a faint smile. "No, I was just asking." The entire morning I stayed in my study but couldn't focus. The vague emotions from the night before kept creeping into my thoughts. The image of Ethan's nervous eyes, his trembling hands brushing against me. All of it left me unsettled. I told myself I had done the right thing by setting boundaries with him. But why did my heart still feel so heavy? Perhaps it was Ethan's gaze, his sincerity and awkwardness, that stirred something in me I didn't want to acknowledge. Not because I felt weak, but because I realized the loneliness within me was deeper than I had thought. Richard was a good husband, but he couldn't fully understand me. The strange feelings stirred by Ethan seemed to illuminate a hidden corner of my heart, a corner I had tried to forget for years. That afternoon, I was tending to the garden behind the house when Ethan stepped out, holding a glass of water. He lingered for a moment, as if hesitating, before walking toward me. "Mom, can I talk to you for a moment?" he asked, his voice soft but sincere. I set down the pruning shears and turned to face him. "What is it, Ethan?" He looked down at the ground, his hands clasping each other tightly. "I'm sorry about last night. I don't know how much I upset you." I cut him off, my tone firm. "Ethan, there's no need to apologize. It's in the past, and I don't hold it against you. But we need to be clear about boundaries. Do you understand?" Ethan looked up, his eyes filled with gratitude. "I understand, Mom. But I can't stop thinking about you. I know it's wrong, but I can't control it." His words made me freeze. My heart pounded, but I forced myself to keep a composed expression. "Ethan, I am your father's wife. This isn't just wrong for me. It's wrong for you as well. You're a smart young man. You'll overcome these feelings." Ethan nodded, though I could see he was still grappling with himself. "I'll try, Mom," he said, his voice trailing off. When Ethan walked away, I stayed in the garden, my mind swirling with chaotic thoughts. I told myself I needed to be stronger, to be clearer. But why was it so difficult? I didn't resent Ethan, nor did I think he was to blame. On the contrary, I understood that his feelings stemmed from loneliness, from a longing to be understood, something I had experienced myself. But I couldn't let things spiral out of control. Richard was someone to whom I owed loyalty and gratitude. Ethan was a young man, and I didn't want to ruin his future over fleeting emotions. That night, sitting alone in my bedroom, a wave of loneliness washed over me. The soft yellow light in the room couldn't dispel the emptiness in my heart. The image of Ethan, the sincerity in his eyes, kept resurfacing like an unrelenting reminder. I told myself, I can't afford to be weak. This is not the path I chose. It's all just a misunderstanding. Everything will be fine. But did I have the strength to move past this, or would things become even more complicated? I wasn't sure. All I knew was that an undercurrent was stirring within me, and I needed to find a way to subdue it before it was too late. The story continued with mounting tension, as both Ethan and I had to confront increasingly complex and unavoidable emotions. In the days that followed, our home was enveloped in an unusual silence. Richard remained busy with work, often returning late at night, while Ethan and I seemed to intentionally avoid each other. I noticed the change in Ethan's gaze whenever we happened to cross paths. It was no longer the shy look from before, but a somber expression tinged with inner conflict. I wasn't doing much better. The turmoil in my heart left me unable to concentrate on work or even my daily routines. Every time I thought of Ethan's pensive eyes or his warm voice during our conversation in the garden, my chest tightened. One evening, after finishing work, I came home more exhausted than ever. Richard wasn't back yet, and the house was so quiet I could hear my own footsteps on the wooden floor. I stepped into the living room and unexpectedly found Ethan sitting there, staring blankly out the window. The light from the table lamp cast a glow on his face, making him look more mature than his age. "Ethan, why are you still awake?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Ethan turned to face me, his eyes meeting mine. "I couldn't sleep, Mom. I wanted to talk to you." I hesitated. My instincts told me this wouldn't be a simple conversation. Still, I sat down on the chair across from him, maintaining a safe distance. "Go ahead, I'm listening," I said, my tone gentle but laced with caution. Ethan lowered his head, his hands clasped tightly together as if searching for the right words. "I know I shouldn't feel this way, but I can't help it. I really admire you. Not just because you're an accomplished woman, but because you're so beautiful that I can't take my eyes off you." His words stunned me. I couldn't believe he had the courage to say something like that. My heart raced, but I tried to remain composed. "Ethan, do you realize what you're saying? I'm your father's wife. This isn't just wrong. It's dangerous," I said, my gaze firm. Ethan lifted his head, his eyes filled with anguish. "I know, Mom. I know it's wrong. But I can't stop myself. I just wanted you to know that you mean so much to me." His words left me feeling conflicted. I felt both anger and compassion for him. I knew Ethan wasn't trying to hurt anyone, but he was still too young to fully understand his emotions. When Ethan left, I remained seated in the chair, my mind swirling with chaotic thoughts. I asked myself, how did it come to this? Is it my fault? Or is it just weakness on both sides? I felt torn. Part of me wanted to reprimand Ethan, to establish a clear boundary and protect this family. But another part, deep within, sympathized with him. I knew that, like him, I was also struggling with myself. That night, sitting alone in my study, I unexpectedly thought of my mother. She once told me, "A strong woman doesn't just control her life, she controls her emotions as well." I reminded myself that I couldn't afford to be weak. I couldn't let these vague emotions affect my life, and I certainly couldn't allow them to ruin Ethan's future. But did I have the strength to do so? Could I weather this storm of emotions, or would everything spiral further out of control? These questions haunted me, making the night seem unbearably long. The next morning when I saw Ethan, I tried to maintain as normal an attitude as possible. "Ethan, do you have some time? I'd like to talk," I said. He looked at me, his eyes tinged with worry, but he nodded. "Yes, Mom." We stepped into the garden, where the morning sunlight filtered gently through the lush green leaves. I took a deep breath and began. "Ethan, I know you're dealing with complicated emotions, but I need you to understand that we can't let those feelings affect this relationship. I need you to be strong and mature." Ethan lowered his head, his voice soft but sincere. "I understand, Mom. I'll try." Those words felt like an unspoken promise between us. But would that promise be enough to keep everything under control, or was it merely the calm before a greater storm? The story reached its climax as Ethan and I faced difficult choices and unavoidable consequences. That evening, Richard returned home after a long day at work. He looked tired but maintained his usual kind demeanor. Ethan sat at the dining table, but his eyes avoided mine. I tried to act normal, but the tension in the air seemed to choke the room. "How was work today?" I asked Richard, attempting to break the silence. Richard nodded, sipping his water. "It's fine, but I think I need more time to adjust to the new role." I smiled, but a strange feeling stirred within me. I couldn't help comparing Richard, gentle but timid, with Ethan, young, vibrant, and the source of feelings I dared not name. Ethan remained silent throughout dinner. When I tried to engage him in conversation, I only received short replies. I knew he was trying to avoid me, but his furtive glances couldn't go unnoticed. After Richard went upstairs to rest, I stayed behind to tidy up the kitchen. Ethan entered quietly, standing in the corner as if he wanted to say something but hesitated. Finally, he spoke, his voice trembling. "Mom, I'm sorry." I paused and turned to face him. "Sorry for what, Ethan?" He lowered his head, staring at the floor. "I know I'm wrong, but I can't stop these feelings. I know you've been trying to keep your distance, but Stop, Ethan," I interrupted firmly, my tone sharper than ever. "Do you realize what you're doing? We cannot continue like this." He looked up, his eyes red. "I don't mean to, Mom, but I can't ignore how I feel." I felt cornered. Ethan's words cut through me like a sharp blade. I knew that if I didn't act decisively, things would spiral out of control. I stepped closer to Ethan, trying to remain composed. "Ethan, listen to me. You're a good young man. But you need to understand that I am your father's wife. This isn't just wrong. It will destroy everything." Ethan stared at me, his eyes filled with anguish. "Mom, I don't know how to forget these feelings. Every time I see you, I can't stop thinking about you." His words left me shaken. I could feel the truth in them, but they also terrified me. I knew I had to be stronger than ever to maintain the boundary between us. "Ethan, listen carefully," I said, placing a firm hand on his shoulder, my gaze unwavering. "You need to stop. This is not just my responsibility. It's yours too. We must protect this family." Ethan remained silent, then nodded. But I could see that it wasn't an easy promise for him to make. That night, when I entered the bedroom, Richard was already lying in bed, his eyes fixed on me. "Angela, is something wrong? You've seemed different lately." I froze for a moment, but quickly regained my composure. "It's nothing, Richard. Just work stress." Richard looked at me for a long time before sighing. "If something's bothering you, you can tell me. I'm always here." His words filled me with guilt like never before. I knew I had to do something to stop everything before it was too late. The next morning I called Ethan out to the garden. We stood under the early morning sun, the quiet so profound I could hear the wind rustling through the leaves. "Ethan, I want you to hear this clearly," I said firmly. "I'll do everything I can to help you find your direction in life, but I need you to promise me one thing. Let go of these feelings and focus on your future." Ethan looked at me, his eyes filled with pain. "Mom, I don't know if I can, but I'll try." I smiled faintly, a smile full of determination. "Good. You're a smart and strong young man, Ethan. I believe you can do it." As Ethan walked away, I remained standing, watching his retreating figure. I knew this battle wasn't over, but I believed we could overcome it if we both tried hard enough. In the days that followed, I tried to maintain a facade of normalcy. I spent more time at the office, avoiding as much face-to-face interaction with Ethan as possible. But he didn't avoid me. In fact, he made a point of helping with small tasks around the house. I knew he was trying to show maturity, but his efforts only made things harder. Richard, despite his kind demeanor, was not oblivious. Lately, he had been observing both Ethan and me more closely. He didn't ask any questions, but there was a subtle suspicion in his eyes every time he looked at me. One evening, as I was getting ready for bed, Richard suddenly asked, "Angela, what do you think about Ethan lately?" I froze for a moment, then forced my voice to sound casual. "He's the same as usual, just looking for a job." Richard didn't say anything more, merely nodding slightly. But I knew he was beginning to notice the unusual tension between Ethan and me. One afternoon, as I arrived home, Ethan was waiting at the door. His eyes carried the same sadness as before, but there was also a trace of resolve. "Mom, can I talk to you for a moment?" Ethan asked, his voice quiet but serious. I hesitated, then nodded. "All right, let's sit in the living room." We both sat on the sofa, the atmosphere so tense it felt suffocating. Ethan lowered his head, seemingly arranging his thoughts. "Mom, I know I'm wrong, but I can't pretend nothing's happening. My feelings, they're not the kind of feelings a son should have for his stepmother." I sat in stunned silence, my heart feeling as though it had stopped. I had known this all along, but hearing Ethan admit it so plainly forced me to confront the reality. "Ethan, stop," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You need to understand that what you're feeling isn't right. We are family, and I won't let anything destroy this family." Ethan looked at me, his eyes red and filled with anguish. "I know, but I can't stop. Every time I see you, I feel—" "That's enough," I interrupted sharply, my tone more severe. "Ethan, I won't let this continue. If you truly care about this family, you need to control yourself." Ethan fell silent, but the torment in his eyes was unmistakable. I stood up and left the room without saying another word. That evening, Richard came home early. When he entered the kitchen, he saw me standing motionless by the counter, my eyes distant. He approached and placed a hand on my shoulder. "Angela, is something wrong? You haven't seemed like yourself lately." Startled, I quickly tried to regain my composure. "It's nothing, Richard. Just work stress." Richard looked at me for a long moment, then said gently, "If something's bothering you, you can tell me. I don't want you to bear everything alone." His words only deepened my guilt. He deserved honesty, but I knew that if the truth came out, nothing would ever be the same. That night, as I sat reading in the bedroom, the door suddenly opened. Ethan stood there, his face tense. "Ethan, what are you doing? It's late. Go back to your room," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Ethan stepped inside and closed the door behind him. "Mom, I can't take it anymore. I need to say everything." "Ethan, leave this room right now." I raised my voice, but he didn't move. "Mom, I love you," Ethan said, his voice trembling but resolute. His words froze the air in the room. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, but there was no hint of joking in his eyes. "Ethan, are you insane? Get out of here immediately," I shouted, but my voice was just as shaky as his. Hearing the commotion, Richard entered the room. He saw Ethan standing in the middle of the room, and me trembling on the bed. His gaze shifted between the two of us before darkening. "What's going on here?" Richard asked, his voice filled with suspicion. I couldn't find the words to explain, but Ethan stepped in front of Richard, his eyes defiant. "Dad, I think we need to talk." Richard looked at Ethan, then turned to me. "Angela, what is this? I want the truth." I felt as if my heart was being crushed. Everything was falling apart before my eyes, and I had no idea how to salvage the situation. The air in the room was suffocating, heavy with tension. Richard stood there, his eyes darting between Ethan and me, waiting for an explanation. But I couldn't bring myself to speak. My throat felt constricted by 1,000 chaotic emotions. Ethan, whom I had once thought of as an innocent young man, now stood before us with the demeanor of someone fighting for what he believed in. "Dad, I'm sorry," Ethan began, his voice trembling yet steady with determination. "I can't hide my feelings anymore." Richard furrowed his brow, his expression a mixture of surprise and discomfort. "Feelings? Ethan, what on earth are you talking about?" I wanted to intervene, to stop Ethan before things spiraled completely out of control, but the words caught in my throat. Ethan, unfazed, pressed on. I think I've fallen in love with Mom." His words rang out in the room like an explosion, shattering everything in their wake. Richard's eyes widened as he stared at Ethan, then turned to me. A mixture of shock and disappointment etched across his face. "Angela, how long have you known about this?" "Richard, It's not what you think, I stammered, my voice shaking with panic. Ethan is confused. This isn't my fault, and it's not his either. Confused? Richard's voice was laced with anger as he glared at me. Angela, this goes far beyond confusion. This is our family, and now it's being torn apart by this. Ethan stood silently, making no attempt to justify himself further. His gaze toward Richard wasn't defiant, but remorseful, yet there was no regret in his eyes for having spoken the truth. I felt trapped between two men. On one side was Richard, the kind, gentle husband who had saved my life and given me a reason to build this family. On the other was Ethan, the passionate, intense young man who had forced me to confront feelings I hadn't dared to acknowledge. Richard, please listen to me, I said, trying to remain calm. Ethan is just a young man seeking attention. He doesn't understand his emotions. I've tried to keep my distance, but things got out of hand beyond my control. Richard's eyes were filled with doubt as he looked at me. Angela, do you think I can believe that? If you've done nothing wrong, then why has it come to this? I had no response. The truth was, despite my denial, the conflicted emotions within me had only made the situation harder to manage. Ethan stepped forward, facing Richard. Dad, don't blame Mom. This is my fault. I couldn't control my feelings, but she has never done anything wrong. She's always tried to keep her distance and never encouraged me. Richard looked at his son, his expression softening slightly, though the hurt remained evident. Ethan, you know this is wrong. Why did you let it happen? Because I couldn't stop feeling this way, Ethan replied, his voice filled with sincerity. But I'll leave, Dad. I'll find a job and move out so I won't trouble this family anymore. Ethan's words pierced my heart. I didn't want him to leave, but I knew it was the only way to salvage the situation. After Ethan left the room, Richard sank into a chair, burying his head in his hands. Angela, I don't know what to do anymore. This family. Where did we go wrong? Richard, we didn't do anything wrong, I said, tears streaming down my face. It's just that everything has become more complicated than we ever imagined. Richard looked at me, his eyes now heavy with exhaustion. Angela, I need time. I need to think. The next morning, Ethan left the house, carrying only a small suitcase. I stood by the window, watching his figure disappear into the distance. A hollow feeling swelled in my chest, one I couldn't put into words. I knew things would never be the same again. Richard, the man I had once trusted deeply, now looked at me with a different gaze. Our family stood on the brink of collapse, and I wasn't sure if I could do anything to mend it. Though our story had reached its peaks and conflicts, it remained far from over. All that lingered was the hope that time might heal the wounds we had inflicted on one another.